Hey folks, welcome to the Stack Overflow podcast. Today we have another episode of Leaders of Code, where we chat with tech leaders about the work they're doing, their challenges, how they build great teams and great products, and much more. My name is Eira May. I am the B2B Editor here at Stack Overflow. And today we wanted to highlight some findings from our 2025 developer survey of almost 50,000 developers around the world. Specifically, we were interested in looking at some takeaways from that survey for the enterprise or for business leaders, folks who are not necessarily developers themselves, or they're not developers anymore, but they're managing teams of developers, they're making development and technology decisions for their organization. What are the key learnings from the developer survey for those folks? So to help me kind of pull those insights out and unpack what they mean, I have here today Natalie Rotnov. She is a Senior Product Marketing Manager for our Enterprise Product Suite at Stack Overflow. Hey, Natalie, how's it going?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Do you want to give us a little background on your team and what your role, what your team works on?
I am a Senior Product Marketing Manager for our Enterprise Products team here at Stack Overflow. And so we really believe that Stack Overflow has one of the best knowledge sharing models in the world. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can productize that and sell it to enterprise companies to solve real problems for them. Two areas of the enterprise products suite that I cover specifically from a product marketing perspective are our data licensing business and Stack Overflow for Teams, which is our flagship SaaS product. So Stack Overflow has a massive data corpus, more than 60 million Q&A pairs that are both really diverse across spanning over 60,000 technology topics and have, this format that's really conducive to AI and learning how humans think and solve problems. So data licensing area of the business is we license our data to AI companies to help improve the performance of their LLMs or AI applications. And then Stack Overflow for Teams is a knowledge sharing platform that large enterprise companies use internally to help improve knowledge transfer between development and technology teams, to help with onboarding, and also to feed enterprise knowledge to their AI applications, internal proprietary knowledge, using the Stack Overflow public model just for a private use case.
I know that working between data licensing and Stack Overflow for Teams kind of gives you some insight into what the hyperscalers are doing in terms of how that impacts the enterprise down market. I was wondering if, I know we had some findings we wanted to talk about around the trust decline that was revealed in this year's developer survey. So developer trust in AI tools output is on the decline. Do you want to talk a little bit about that for us?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, the trust decline didn't really surprise me much. I mean, who are we speaking to in the survey? Developers who are skeptics. They have to be skeptics and critical thinkers by trade. And so, but what they told us was that they actively distrust AI. And I think this, while it didn't surprise me, I also think it's a good thing. What I've seen and what I'm reading is that reasoning models that they're putting out, which are models that are supposed to be able to break down problems and think like humans can, are relatively immature. I say that because it's a good thing. I mean, and even you saw in the survey, some of the most used models, we asked about LLMs that they're using this year, are reasoning models. So they're definitely gaining in popularity, but they're still immature. And I don't know if did you see that Apple research paper that was floating, making its rounds on social media, The Illusion of Thinking? It was a couple months ago.
I think I did see that, but I didn't read it. Can you kind of recap that for us?
Now, I'm not a data scientist, so
Sure.
I'm not going to get into the specifics, but I can tell you how I interpreted it from a business standpoint is that what it found is that LLMs, I mean, they're obviously fantastic, like high performing models and know a lot, but it made it seem like what they're actually doing is pattern matching and memorizing instead of fully thinking and reasoning like humans, like we do in our sleep every day. The paper showed that they performed worse on more, as tasks got more complex. So that just proves that a little bit that you could say that these models are still not anywhere close to, actually reasoning and thinking like a human can. And that has downstream effects on all this stuff you hear about agentic workflows and systems too. I say that because developers don't need research papers to disillusion them, as I said earlier, and why I think we saw the trust decline in AI in the survey this year. They're already, they're the ones that are on the front lines. They're already intimately familiar with the nuances of coding, debugging, and problem solving. We dug into that a little bit in the survey, actually, some of their biggest frustrations with AI to get to the bottom of it a bit.
So what was that? What were their biggest frustrations with AI?
Well, the top one was AI solutions that are almost right, but not quite. And we're actually working with some of our analysts to run a follow-up survey, what we call pulse surveys here, to try to dig into what the not quite right means. But I think the second biggest frustration can probably give us some clues as to what it involves, because the second biggest frustration was debugging AI generated code is more time consuming. We know that it likely involves probably having to go back, look at code that AI generated and figuring out like why it's not working. And if you don't have a lot of the context, I can see how that would take a lot more time.
So given that developers are finding debugging AI generated code to be so time consuming, are they turning to the community, to actual people for intervention and validation to help with that? What's the response been like there?
Yeah, actually, so, AI can obviously help with a lot of debugging scenarios, but we're finding that a lot of problems still need community intervention and validation. So in the survey, over 80% of developers still visit Stack Overflow regularly. And also 75% still want to ask another person for help when they don't trust AI's answers. And something else that's a related insight to this that wasn't in the survey, our parent company Process, they have an area called Process AI where they've developed benchmarks for LLMs and how they perform on Stack Overflow content. They have an LLM that categorizes question types on the platform, whether they're advanced or basic. We've actually seen that the number of what they consider advanced questions on stackoverflow.com literally double since 2023. With that, actually, also the usage of the tag large language model showed up on the survey too as a really popular tag. And so I think knowing all of that, developers are still visiting Stack Overflow regularly. They still want humans to help them validate AI answers when they don't trust them, and that these advanced questions are increasing on the platform shows that, in my opinion, LLMs probably aren't good. They have yet to master complex reasoning problems. So developers need to come to the platform to do it or to solve for these. They are creating new problems for communities to solve that we've never seen before, potentially. And I think that's really powerful. I think, speaks to the value of Stack Overflow and other communities, not just Stack Overflow. There's still a need there, despite AI automating a lot of things.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely still that need for like human connection, validation, like brainstorming it with another person. So from the perspective of like you're managing a team of developers, let's say, you see that there's this distrust in the output of AI tools. There's some frustration over how long the debugging takes, and there's still this need for community validation. Like, what do you do with that as a manager or as a leader?
So I would do a couple things. First, I would recommend definitely investing in a RAG system, but I want to start with something should be the underlying foundation of that, is investing. You need to invest in spaces for your developers to curate and validate new problems and solutions. So like I said, on stackoverflow.com, we're seeing the nature of questions changing because AI is changing the problem solving and debugging workflows, while also developers are telling us they still want humans to help them validate problems that they're running into. So enterprises and businesses need to invest in some type of space to allow them to do that. And ideally, this space is where they can add these problems, solutions in a structured format with metadata and, quality signals when you're using that data to feed your internal LLMs or agents or whatever, that the data is really well suited already for AI, ideally. So definitely top recommendation. You need to have some type of internal solution, whether that's out of the box or something you're building in-house, that gives them this space to try to get consensus and share perspectives and validate new problems that they're running into as a result of AI.
You mentioned RAG as a part of this, so retrieval augmented generation. Can you talk a bit about why you think it's important for companies to be investing in a RAG system right now?
RAG is definitely having a moment, and I know we hear a lot about it, but it definitely came up in this year's survey quite a few times, and it's showing that developers are trying to build potentially or manage RAG systems that summarize and make it easier for their teams and peers to find this knowledge coming from other tools. So some of the ways that we saw RAG insights pop up in this year's survey are, we asked professional developers what they're learning about, and 36% indicated they're learning RAG, actually, and investing in maintainers and tools to better support knowledge sharing. Also, we asked about where they're adopting AI in the development workflow and where they're not yet. Searching for answers is the part of the development workflow where AI is most widely adopted. So it seems like that developers are bought in to that part of the development workflow. Like, companies, I think, need to double down on that. The RAG tag is one of the most popular new tags in this year's survey too. So I don't think this trend is going to slow down anytime soon, because the value of RAG is that it summarizes internal knowledge sources into these hopefully concise, relevant answers, insights to help in different parts of, where developers are working, whether that be in an IDE, in your chat platform, wherever. Like I said, ideally, it's summarizing knowledge that is already, well structured, has, helpful metadata like tags that make it easier for LLMs to parse and categorize, to avoid hallucinations. So I think knowing that developers are really bought into RAG already can really help companies improve their developer experience. And if they're already investing in RAG, great. Just, I think it's validation that they should continue to do so.
So investing in RAG, investing in these spaces for developers to curate and validate new problems and solutions. Are there other recommendations that you would make for folks at the enterprise level who are making decisions here?
Yeah, so I know some companies out there are building their own models. And so I think when you're building your own models, obviously you're probably, whether you're using it internally, that model for internal use cases, or maybe you're building it into a product, or even if you're building a frontier model, you need to continue to fine tune that model to improve performance. And I know a lot of companies are using text-based data for that, and even multimodal data. I keep hearing a lot about that to improve performance. But I think two things, if you're building your own models, I think two things that you need to think about are knowing, earlier I spoke to reasoning models are really immature. So how can you improve a model's reasoning capabilities? And a lot of that has to do with, is it learning from data that helps it understand how humans think? So, and how knowledge is curated over time and how those humans are making decisions. And it gives models insights into that thought process, which is really important for reasoning. And even the comments, something that I actually forgot to mention, and I just thought of it, an insight on the survey this year. We, for the first time, I think, asked how people are using Stack Overflow or why they come to Stack Overflow. And the number one thing was they look at comments. And I do this even when I go to other sites. I always look at the comments. And a lot of that has to do with, you'll see the solution, and then you kind of want to hear, how are people talking about this? Are they giving different perspectives on this?
Right. What's the discussion that's happening around this is kind of how I think of it when I scroll right down to the comments section.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a data point actually that can help models reason because they're learning how humans kind of talk back and forth or problem solve. It's part of the problem solving process. So both for, both in data licensing on public platform comments are like a gold mine. And also for teams, if companies are using our Teams product, I know we use our own internal instance. If you look at the comments on some of our posts internally, rich data that like gives you a lot of context as to why we're asking a question or why, we're saying this is the solution or an answer. So I say all of that because one of my recommendations, if you're building your own model, is really think hard about how you can improve its reasoning, what data types can help you with that. And then also, model drift is a real concern. Like, is your model is it grounded in truth as things change in the real world? And I know synthetic data is a big thing that's supposed to help with this in the future. I do believe that companies need to build these human validation loops to ensure that you're getting feedback constantly on outputs to make sure they're accurate and they align with human values. And actually, we're in the process of rolling out some integration options for some of our partners where they could their models will be part of a leaderboard on public platform or stackoverflow.com, and users can vote and see responses by the different models and vote on those responses and give feedback. So I think that's another thing to think about if you're building, obviously, your own models. So, yeah.
So you were saying the trust decline in AI tools, developers' trust decline in AI tools didn't surprise you, but there was another insight from the survey that did surprise you around tool usage. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
I feel like for years, we've all been trying to solve this like tool sprawl problem, and prevent context switching. And it seems like there's always something coming out that's supposed to be the end all be all to all of these tools that we use. It feels like these tools are actually like a necessary evil. I don't want to say necessary evil, but for lack of a better term, because over a third of developers in the survey said they use 6 to 10 tools. And then if you look at job satisfaction and the number of tools and see if there's a correlation between the two, there isn't. So it shows that I think developers kind of accept that, each of these tools probably serves a very specific use case and that they need it to do their job. And it's just a fact of life. And so I think that surprised me because you also have, this agentic revolution happening right now that's supposed to make our lives super easy.
Take care of that tool sprawl problem, basically, is the promise, right? Of agentic AI, that it's going to you're not going to have to deal with all these different platforms. You're just going to ask one interface and it's going to go to town.
So, and it seems like that's not the case yet because also we asked a lot about agents for the first time in this year's survey. And so it looks like they're not widely adopted yet. That area, reasoning models actually power agentic systems. So reasoning models are relatively immature, so are agents. And also in addition to the security and privacy concerns with them, because like you said, you're connecting this single interface to all of your internal tools. Is authentication up to par with your internal standards? Lots of security and privacy concerns there. So it looked like of the survey respondents that answered these questions, 52% either don't use agents or stick to simpler AI tools. But if you look at those that have adopted agents, 70% say agents have reduced the time spent on specific development tasks, and 69% agree that they've increased productivity. And also, I think it looks like those that are adopting agents are more likely to be younger developers too. Or I shouldn't say younger, I think less experienced.
Yeah, that is interesting. So that means basically about half of developers aren't using agents at all. But of the half that are, 70% of them basically say they're reducing the time they spend on specific tasks. And about the same percentage are saying they've increased productivity. What do you think the sort of power users, for lack of a better word, the folks who are using the agentic AI systems and seeing benefits from that, what are they doing that makes that adoption successful that other users might not have the opportunity to do or not be doing?
it looks like in the survey, they're saying they're integrating them with APIs, MCP servers, and actually other agents even. So we have agents talking to agents now too. I wanted to specifically talk about MCP servers. They're definitely having a moment. And if you don't know what, I'm assuming most of our audience knows what MCP is by now, but if you don't, it's a standard model context protocol developed by Anthropic to help LLMs learn standardized data so LLMs can learn from it a lot faster. And there are a lot of different standards already out there. Like at my last company, we talked a lot about IIIF, which is a standard for how images are shared on the web. It makes really easy for systems to communicate with each other using whatever the data is. In that case, IIIF is images. What though MCP servers do, in particular, without getting really technical, is they can help familiarize LLMs and agents with implicit knowledge, which is like the language, culture, way of working at your organization a lot faster. And like I said, I was talking to you about comments earlier and why they're like a gold mine for information and context for LLMs. A lot can probably be revealed in comments from how like an organization talks to each other, problem solves, and MCP just makes it a lot easier for like an agent to learn from that type of data. The Stack Overflow for Teams one, actually, it has read-write access and can be used in any MCP compatible tool like Cursor or Gemini. So the power of this is like if you're building, maybe a developer is building an internal app at your company using Cursor, they can connect it to the Stack Overflow for Teams MCP server and immediately it will start learning and using enterprise knowledge to inform the outputs of that application. So it's grounded in your organization's truth and proprietary information and knowledge. And the great thing about Teams, what makes it different is because most MCP servers kind of serve the same purpose, but Teams, that knowledge is well structured. It has quality signals like votes, accepted answers. It has high value metadata tags. And it also is hopefully most of the time vetted by your organization's internal subject matter experts. So that knowledge is really grounded in your organization's truth and that implicit knowledge. And the MCP server just makes it that much easier for applications to learn from that knowledge and then provide better responses, more relevant responses to your dev teams and others.
So zooming out again, you're thinking about this from the perspective of a business leader, a technical team manager. How do you fulfill the promise of AI agents? Basically, like how do you get them to deliver on the value that they promised and kind of solve that tool sprawl problem while recognizing that, maybe 6 to 10 tools is the happy number for a lot of folks out there. Like, what are your recommendations when it comes to agentic AI and tool sprawl for managers?
There's still, a lot of unknowns around agentic use cases, around, their accuracy and also privacy and security concerns. I think companies should really think about piloting low risk agentic use cases first and roll these out iteratively. And I don't know if it makes sense to do this maybe with your interns or newer developers at your organization, getting them up to speed on things. Maybe it makes sense for them to take this on, but definitely recommend thinking about piloting low risk use cases first and rolling it out in a really systematic fashion to test those first before trying out bigger and more far-reaching use cases. So that's my first one. I also, I bring up MCP servers. So like really, whether you're thinking about building an MCP server in-house or you're looking at what MCP servers are available for the products you already use, I think you need to be doing one of those right now, just because, like I said earlier, they offer, it's a standard that offers a really efficient, flexible way for AI agents and assistants to access your internal data and learn from it. And so to ensure that any responses coming from agents are really grounded in your organization's knowledge. So it knows that implicit knowledge and things that are unique to your company first and foremost. And then, so something that we actually haven't talked about really here, and like I said, we could have our own whole podcast around like small language models and agents and what that means for enterprises. But I did want to talk about small language models and domain specific language models because we're seeing that become more popular for a couple reasons. One, so small language models are exactly what it says. It's not a large language model. It's fine-tuned for specific use cases and domains. So a lot of that has to do with this explosion of agents. You want agents to get really good at performing very specific tasks. And especially if you're working at like a healthcare company or a finance company, those tasks probably are very complex. So it's helpful to have small language models that are trained on domain specific data to help with that. And they're also a lot cheaper to build and maintain and more cost effective and better for the environment. So I think that's why we're seeing them gain popularity. And so another recommendation I have for companies is either, if you're not already thinking about small language models, I think you should either look at pre-trained ones already on the market, or if you have the resources, think about building your own. But I think you're obviously going to be using your own proprietary internal data for that. But I would consider looking at also third-party data that could augment that data that's domain specific and specific to the use case that you're looking at. And ideally that data is, well structured and vetted by humans. And Stack Overflow, we have a ton of domain specific data available. And we are always, looking at ways that we can slice and dice our data. And we're currently looking at ways that we could help improve small language model performance specifically. I also want to acknowledge that APIs are an important piece to this. And MCP servers, they can communicate obviously with APIs to get that data, help LLMs learn from that data. But I think though, not just talking about agents, tool sprawl problem. If you're not looking at solving some of that with agents or MCP servers, you could also just, I think, look at products you're already using. What are their APIs like? Can your team build maybe some, integrations or that make sense so that they're not context switching as much between these tools? Or I think your team needs to assess that experience, the API experience, and look at a couple different areas to make sure it's a good API to do that. And a couple things you could look at are is the API well documented and supported? Hopefully it is. I think if companies are smart today, they're definitely have good APIs. They're well documented. Is it a REST API or some other architecture that's friendly to AI? What's the pricing like? Is it transparent, easy to understand? And then also, is there an SDK? For example, we actually just launched one for Teams, Stack Overflow for Teams. It's currently in TypeScript, but I know the teams are looking at doing additional languages. I think don't sleep on APIs and looking at what you can do with existing APIs for the tools you already use to help solve the tool sprawl problem. In addition to, pursuing low risk agentic use cases in tangent to that and doing that using MCP servers.
So all of these topics that we've talked about, these pieces of advice that you've thrown out, if you were to boil it down into one sort of like overarching thing for companies to be thinking about right now, what would you say?
You really need to be looking long and hard about what internal data sources do you have that LLMs and your AI can learn from and provide great answers and accurate answers to your teams. So think about, am I giving my developers a space to create net new knowledge to problem solve and share solutions and talk about it? And is that in a space that's well structured, has good metadata and quality signals that are conducive to AI? And even if, not just for internal data, but if you're looking at third-party data, same thing, same criteria that could augment some of this based on whatever industry you're in. That's really, really important because no matter what you're doing internally, building new agentic systems, creating, RAG search streams for your teams, like if the underlying data is not good or not well structured, then those responses are only going to be good as the data they're learning from. That's really important. Even if you're creating your own synthetic data, which we're seeing some, that's really important. So really think long and hard about that. Figure out how to do that and improve the underlying data of your systems.
Awesome. So I think we're going to end it there for today. I want to thank Natalie so much for coming on and helping unpack some of these findings from the developer survey. We would love to have you on again. I have been Eira May. I am the B2B editor at Stack Overflow. You can find me on LinkedIn or you can email me at emay@stackoverflow.com.
Thanks for having me on. I'm Natalie Rotnov, Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Stack Overflow. You can also find me on LinkedIn and email me questions, thoughts to nrotnov, ROTNOV as in Victor, at stackoverflow.com.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next time.